That was eight powerful countries form an alliance of forces to invade Beijing. In China, we say 八国联军攻打北京。But now those eight powerful countries, Britain, US, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, Japan, and Austro-Hungarian Empire. Those eight countries was the leading power in the world. And their leading power with a strong military force. It was supported by their economic basis. Those eight countries combined, their GDP contributed to 50.4% of the global GDP. That means half of the global GDP produced in those eight countries. And 1 century later, in the year 2000, we all remember there's a G8 country, group of 8. And those 8 countries are United States, Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Russia, Japan. Exactly the same as the 8-country alliance in 1900. And only one country was repressed because Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed after the World War I, and it was replaced by Canada. And those G8 countries, how come they form a group of G8? Because their combined GDP was 47% of the global GDP. Again, about half of the global GDP. They are the strongest, richest, industrialist country. So they are most powerful. And they're from the G8. And so from this 1 century time, the 8 powerful countries, their contribution to the global GDP has been about 50% for a whole century. It did not change much. And during the century, the wars in peace were in war. Basically, depends on the relation among those 8 countries. We know the First World War was caused by the Germany and Austro-Hungarian Empire on the one side, and the other 6 countries on the other side. Due to the geopolitical conflicts, they cannot solve those kind of problems in the negotiation table that caused the First World War. Again, the Second World War was Germany, Italy, Japan on the one side, and the other 5 countries on the other side. Again, due to the geopolitical conflicts, they cannot address that in the negotiation table, leading to the Second World War. And during the century, certainly there are some kind of uncertainty crisis in the world, but basically, if the leaders of those 8 countries can reach an agreement, they can address the issue basically, in a smooth way. But how come in 2018, President Xi Jinping proposed the hypothesis of great change unseen in a century? Because in 2018, the combined GDP of the Group of 8 dropped from 47% in 2000 down to 34.7%, only a little bit higher than 1/3. Because the loss of the dominance of their economic position, the ability of those 8 leading countries to handle the global issues dropped. And one example was in 2008 when the financial crisis erupted. In the past, when you have financial crisis, like 97, 98 Asian financial crisis, basically US and the other member of G8 country, you have made a decision, the IMF, the World Bank will follow the decision, and that crisis will be handled. But in 2008, due to the loss of their economic dominance, US and the G8 country formed. They were unable to handle the crisis by themselves. So in December 2008, the US President Bush Jr. called the G20 meeting to discuss the way to handle the 2008 global financial crisis. And since 2008, G8 was replaced by G20. Now, G20 is the most important global governance and handling the global issues. And this is something we never observed in the 20th century. Because in the 20th century, basically it's a century of those 8 countries. Now, it's a century of a lot of emerging market participate in global governance. And the question is that, how come during the 20th century, the global economic orders was so stable? As I mentioned, in 1900, the 8 countries, their combined GDP was 50%, 50.4% of global GDP. And in 2000, those 8 countries combined, their GDP was 47% of global GDP. In 1 century time, those 8 countries combined GDP only reduced 3.4%. But if you look into the per capita GDP, because population growth rate in high-income country is lower than the developing country. So if you look at the per capita GDP, actually in the whole 20th century, the income gap between the rich and the developing world actually is widening. And how come that turning into the 21st century, within 18 years, from 2000 to 2008, the G8 countries' weight in the global GDP reduced from 47% down to 34.7%. It's a drop of 12.3%. How come there's such an acceleration of the loss of the G8 countries' economic weight? Certainly, it was because of the rise of the emerging market economies. And the most important, the rise of China. Because in the year 2000, the economic weight of China in the world was 6.9%. By the time of 2018, the economic weight of China was 16.8%. In that 18 years, the weight of China in the global GDP increased 9.9%. And the G8 country reduced 12.3%. So 80% of the reduction in the G8 economic weight was the rise of China. China contributed to about 80% of the decline of their economic influence. And in this great change, who feel the most lost? I think certainly it's the US. Because throughout the 20th century, US has been the largest economy, most powerful economy in the world. And especially after the collapse of Soviet Union in the 1990s, US became the only superpower in the world. But by the time of 2014, measured by purchasing power parity, the economic size in China overtook the US. US became the second largest economy in the world. That's something they never encountered in the whole century of 20s. Because of that, they failed. Their influence in the world dropped. China's influence in the world rise. And certainly, they want to use the ignition power that they command to contain China's development. So during the Obama administration, they proposed the pivotal to Asia Pacific. Actually, U.S. always, has the military appearance in Pacific. They have the military base in Japan, in Korea, in Philippines, and so on. So-called the pivotal to Asian Pacific was they want to reinforce their military power in Asian Pacific. And the goal was to encircle China by military power. And during the Trump first, they started to have the trade war and technological wars against China. Again, they want to use their trade, their technology to contain China's growth. And in Biden periods, they proposed the alliance of democratic countries, try to use ideology value as a way to decouple from China. Again, that's with an intention to contain China's development. Now Trump come back to office again, and he engaged trade war and a scientific war, military war, and so on, with an intention to contain the growth of China. And often we say, when two big elephants fight, it is glass that suffers. Because China now is the largest trading country in the world, and with 150 and more countries, China is the largest trading partner. So what happened in China will affect not only China, but other countries as well, because of the so-called geopolitical tension in the world. So when we are going to have a peaceful, harmonious global orders again, I think that we have to wait. Wait until per capita GDP in China reaches 50% of US per capita GDP. We know that China has a 1.4 billion population, and the US now has 330 million population. Population size in China will be 4 times and a little bit more than the US in the coming decades. Its effect will not change. And if per capita GDP of China reach 50% of the US, that means economic size in China will be double of the US. And it will be a fact that US cannot change. And when our economic size is twice as large as the US, that means we have more resources to mobilize to handle any kind of situation, including conflicts. Secondly, in China, if our per capita GDP is 50% of the US, the more advanced region in China, including Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, and the 5 coastal provinces, Shandong, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Fujian, and Guangdong. Their combined population is a little bit